Hi, I'm Katie Koval from the Department of Emergency Medicine at the Medical University of South Carolina. And I just wanted to thank Alex and Justin for inviting me to give this presentation. And we're going to talk about what a career in emergency medicine might actually look like. So I've decided to take a profile approach, and I'm going to give you sort of an example of what some of our colleagues in global emergency medicine and what their life actually looks like as they are practicing global emergency medicine as full grown doctors. So the things we're going to talk about today, there's 6 realms of global health careers for physicians, which we're going to talk about. I don't have a ton of examples of physicians who are working in the community, but many of the people that I'm presenting are in academia. But there are many people who are also doing global emergency medicine within the realm of community practice, not just academics. So don't feel like you have to choose academics to do global EM, though it is helpful. We're going to talk a little bit about some examples of research that has been done in global emergency medicine and the importance of context-specific research for wherever you are practicing. And so specifically, the study we're going to talk about is called the FEAST study, and it looks at pediatric sepsis. And then we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability. And if you decide to pursue a career in global emergency medicine, some of the strategies you can employ and things to remember to ensure that the work that you're doing is sustainable and ethical and equitable. So the 6 areas of global emergency medicine, and sorry, my video is sort of covering some of them, but these are the 6 main areas. We're only going to talk about 5 of these. So research, education, health systems development, and the 2 of those I sort of lumped together as education and health systems being building capacity. Then there's disaster response or humanitarian response, and then there's direct clinical care on the ground. And then if anyone is currently involved in the military, sort of really many branches have incredible global health opportunities that us lay people just don't have access. I'm going to give you a little bit of my background and my path. My trajectory to global health started when I was in high school. I think many of us in global health have sort of a formative experience that happened often when we were younger that sort of compelled us, something that we saw or experienced that compelled us to want to pursue something in global health. And I had an opportunity to travel to Honduras for a couple summers with my church youth group for some construction service projects. And I was totally culturally shocked by the things that I saw when I was down in Honduras, by the disparities and just the complete difference in access and socioeconomic differences between the US and Honduras as one of the poorest countries in Latin America at the time. So I actually knew I wanted to do global health before I knew I wanted to do medicine, and thought that medicine might be one of the best ways that I could make an impact in helping reduce some of those disparities. So every sort of step along the way for my career, I have tried to equip myself with an experience or a skill set. I've tried to study a lot of medical Spanish to better position me for a career in global health. I attended medical school at MUSC in Charleston, and then I applied for a leave of absence between my 3rd and 4th year. I knew I sort of wanted some more global health experience before I decided on residency. And I applied for a public health position with a group called CIDERS out of University of Alabama to be a public health worker doing HIV education in Zambia. I applied for a Fogarty fellowship or scholarship, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. And then I applied for an MPH at Hopkins, and that's what panned out for me. And I started my MPH thinking that I wanted to go into pediatrics, but on my return back to my 4th year, I realized that EM was just a much better fit for my diverse clinical interests, and the schedule in EM allows a lot easier travel abroad without the need to sort of firm out your clinic patients to other colleagues when you want to travel. But that year for me, for my MPH, was just an incredible experience. I met people from all over the world, from all different areas of healthcare who were passionate about global health. And during that year, I had the opportunity to travel to Tanzania and I also then, when I went back to my fourth year, I had an elective, a month-long elective at KCMC in Moshi, Tanzania, just as a clinical rotation, which gave me a little bit more exposure. Um, After I finally decided on emergency medicine, I thought that UNC was going to be a great fit for me. They had strong pediatrics, which again, I thought I was going to be a pediatrician for a long time. So strong PDM, and they had a great global health division and opportunity at the time. So Ian Martin, who's now the chair at Milwaukee, was the global health director at the time, and was a great mentor to me during my time at UNC Chapel Hill. I was abroad during my third year elective in residency, and I was actually doing a research project in Kenya and Tanzania, trying to do patient interviews to better understand the delays in care for emergency medicine. So when I studied public health, there was this landmark paper that was called the three delays model, which looked at the reasons that someone might have a delay in getting care. And it was actually specifically targeted around maternal mortality during delivery. And so the first delay being the delay in deciding to seek care and when to go get help or go to the hospital. The second one is the delay in getting to care. And then three, did you get the care that you needed? And was there a long wait once you got to the facility for getting the care that you needed? Um, so um, I decided to, after that experience, I was applying for fellowship at the time, and I pursued a fellowship in global emergency medicine at Stanford, which was a year for me at the time since I'd already had my MPH, and that was really focused on education. During that year at Stanford, I worked with GVK EMRI, which was their primary partnership at the time, which is the largest ambulance system in the world in India. I had never been to Asia prior to this exposure, and I traveled over 10 times to India in the course of 2 years, delivering education to medics in their system, and developing a CME project or a CME coursework, which is not something that was common for their medics at the time. I also worked on trainings in Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Myanmar, and Cambodia. So after a stint in private practice and a move to Chicago with my now husband, and then back to Charleston, where all of my family is, I joined MUSC faculty in 2021 and took over the fellowship from my colleague, Dr. Lacey Mangan-Smith, who I will talk a little bit about in a minute. So these are my two daughters who are 3 and 18 months. And my biggest challenge now is how to be involved in global health and still have young kids. Every day is a challenge of figuring out how to balance it all and trying to be the parent that I would like to be, with the inherent travel requirements for global EM. And as a result, my focus for the time being is more mentoring others. And I'm really involved with the medical students and our residents and our fellows at MUSC and helping mentor them in global health experience while I have to be a little bit more stateside with my girls. So I love this quote. The quest to improve global health represents a challenge of monumental proportions. The problem seems so enormous, the obstacles so great, and success so elusive. On the other hand, it's difficult to imagine a pursuit more closely aligned with the professional values and visceral instincts of most physicians. Many young doctors enter medicine with a passionate interest in global health, and our challenge is to nurture this commitment and encourage its expression. So this is sort of how I think of my role now, as I try to balance parenthood with global health work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about research in global emergency medicine and what that looks like. So I first want to put in a little bit of a plug for the Global Emergency Medicine Literature Review. If you want to know what's been published this past year in terms of global emergency medicine, sort of a broad perspective of the most innovative, the most impactful research over the past year, this is published every year by a giant group of global emergency providers across the country. I had an opportunity to be part of this review over a couple years, and I learned a lot and met a ton of different people. But if you are looking for a topic to present at a local journal club at your residency, here's a great place to start, or if you just want to dig into literature further. And then I couldn't talk about global emergency medicine research without a little bit of a nod to the Fogarty Center. So this was founded in 1968 under Lyndon Johnson. The NIH is divided into 6 centers and 21 institutes. The untimely death of John Fogarty, who was a congressional representative, and he was particularly passionate about that. About global health, and he felt that this was one of the best strategies for political diplomacy was to care for the sick in other countries and help them to develop the capacity themselves. And so the center was named after him. It's a very, of the NIH budgets overall, it's a very small proportion. It's about 81 million budget for the year in 2020. But their goal is to prepare the next generations of scientists to respond to current and future threats in health by providing opportunities to tie biomedical research to real world applications. And they often pair US based and international with an internationally based research. So my highlighted global emergency medicine researcher is Dr. Christine Garia. She was born in Nebraska to Kenyan parents, but spent her formative years from second grade until college back in Kenya in Nairobi. Her parents decided that the US was great, but they really wanted their children to grow up and experience the Kenyan culture. And so actually, because of her transitions back between the US system and the Kenyan system, and because she's a brainiac, she graduated college at 20. For college and medical school, she went back to Nebraska and then on to UNC Emergency Medicine, where I overlapped with her. She was my senior resident when I was an intern. She, I think, decided or had a hint that she wanted to pursue research and wanted to pursue health disparities after she decided to be a sociology major. So she signed up for a sociology class and really seemed to find a mentor in her professor there. They dug into a national survey data set, and she had a huge publication as an undergraduate titled Odds of Having a Regular Physician and Perceptions of Care, Ethnic Patterns for Women, which broke new ground in the study of gender and ethnicity-based healthcare disparities. So this paper really seemed to show that the minority women were less likely to make regular visits to a medical doctor than majority white women, and that the minority women were also less likely to trust their doctors when they did manage to visit one. So it gave her a taste for healthcare disparities and helped to fuel her career, which has now been dedicated to better understanding and trying to problem solve healthcare disparities. After residency, Christine decided to pursue a 2-year fellowship at Yale, in which one of those years allowed her to pursue an advanced degree at the London School of Tropical Medicine and live in London for the year. So she has her degree in tropical medicine. Her research interests center on non-communicable diseases, barriers to care, and community-based interventions with a particular focus on Africa. She was a senior contributor to the first ever national study on non-communicable diseases in Kenya using the WHO STEPS tool, which was in collaboration with the Kenyan Ministry of Health. She was awarded 2 NIH grants, the NHLBI and the NIDA in 2021, which are 2 giant R21 grants, to allow her to continue research in ED populations in Kenya on non-communicable diseases. She's also had her work funded on USAID, by the USAID, the World Bank, and the Gates Foundation, among others. So since she finished her fellowship at Yale, she joined the faculty at Yale and has been there for the past 10 years until this past month. And she has joined the faculty at Stanford to help them develop their global emergency medicine research program even further. So here's just a little smattering of her publications. So here is an example of, this was sort of an earth-shattering paper that was published in 2011. And this looked at, this is New England Journal of Medicine. It looked at more than 3,000 children in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania who presented with concerns for infection with severe febrile illness plus evidence of impaired perfusion, defined as altered mental status, respiratory distress, or like decreased capillary refill, for example. So They compared the intervention was a fluid bolus, 20 to 40 mLs per kg of either an albumin solution or of normal saline. And the comparison group was no bolus of fluid overall. The primary outcome was 48-hour mortality of those septic babies, septic kids. And the secondary outcomes looked at pulmonary edema, increased intracranial pressure, and death or neurological impairment at 4 weeks. So the conclusion of this paper was that fluid boluses significantly increased 48-hour mortality in critically ill children with impaired perfusion in resource-limited settings in Africa. So this was a p-value of 0.003. In the albumin group, the 48-hour mortality was 10.6%. In the saline bolus group, it was 10.5%, and less in the control group at 7.3%. So just for comparison, in a high resource setting, surviving sepsis campaign for pediatric patients, a 10 to 20 ml per kilogram bolus of fluid over the first hour and then titrated to clinical markers of cardiac output. Obviously discontinued if signs of fluid overload develops up to a bolus of 40 to 60 mLs per kg for initial resuscitation of septic shock or other sepsis-related organ dysfunction. So again, the primary outcome mortality at 48 hours showed a higher mortality with either saline or albumin compared to no bolus, and that mortality trend held at 4 weeks too. There was no significant difference in pulmonary edema, increased intracranial pressure, or allergic reaction between the groups, and there was no difference in neurological sequela between any of the groups at 4 weeks outcome. It was consistent. The excess mortality with fluid resuscitation was consistent across all subgroups, regardless of physiological derangement, regardless of the bacterial pathogen that grew out on culture or testing, and really sort of sent shockwaves through the global emergency medicine and pediatric worlds. And this is just sort of one example, again, of why, unfortunately, we can't always apply the research we're taking from a high income setting to a low income setting because the populations are not the same. And so that means there is a huge area of research if we have to repeat some of these big papers, like something even that seems to be as basic and fundamental as fluid resuscitation. That means there is a ton of work of research to be replicated in a low income setting. So I love this quote: give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So I'm going to dig in a little bit into the Stanford GBK EMRI partnership and building capacity from education. So this is also one of my favorite stories in global health. But on the anniversary of India's independence in 2005, beginning with just 14 ambulances in the state of Andhra Pradesh in the city of Hyderabad, the 108 ambulance system in India was born. So similar to our 911 system, they created a centralized number that was very auspicious in the three main religions that they have in India. So Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. And that delivers a call to a call center. So this is Maha, or Dr. Mahadevan, who was director of global emergency medicine at Stanford for many years. And he was approached in 2005 in Stanford. And as GBK EMRI tells it, they were looking for whoever was the best in emergency medicine. And they did a Google search and they found Stanford. And there we found Dr. Mahadevan, whose name in Hindi means God, great God. And so the original developer and founder of GBK EMRI, Mr. Changavali, took a 20-hour flight from India to San Francisco just for a meeting with Maha to propose his involvement with the new ambulance system. And he reportedly met with Maha and flew back to India the same day. Maha said, okay, I would love to be involved, but I'm not sure that I really see this Indian ambulance system really getting off the ground. But if it happens, I will be happy to fly over to India and to get more details on the ground. So after his first trip to India in 2005, he started working with them as a consultant. And by 2007, Stanford had a formal agreement signed to develop an educational curriculum and trained an initial group of 150 skilled paramedics and 30 paramedic instructors. The Stanford team also developed a 105-page manual of pre-hospital protocols, which is now on its third edition. And this is Dr. GVK Reddy, GVK Krishna Reddy, and he is sort of now the adopted founder of GVK EMRI, a large conglomerate. His company specializes in infrastructure. They've built things as large as the Mumbai airport, large overpasses, power plants, and the initial partner, private partner of the public-private partnership that is GVK EMRI. They ran into some financial trouble in 2009, and he agreed to rescue the ambulance system. And he has been philanthropic private support of the partnership for the last 10 years, of which the ambulance system now bears his name. So he has contributed more than $250 million to date through his family foundation for GVK EMRI. So now 18 years later, GVK EMRI has services in 17 states and union territories and also Sri Lanka. They have 14,197 ambulances, 22,000 medics. Ambulances are staffed by a driver and a single EMT. The EMTs receive at least 6 weeks of foundational training. They respond to 26,000 emergencies per day in a population of over 750 million, all for a cost to the patient of $0. The service now caters primarily to the poor, with 85 to 90% of the beneficiaries living below the poverty level in India, and covering more than 75% of India's population, and is the largest ambulance system in the world. The 108 ambulance system has also expanded to provide transportation for clinic visits for pregnant women and women in labor in an effort to combat high numbers of maternal mortality. And they've also trialed a 181 number to help combat gender-based violence. They started in the state of Gujarat with over 10,000 calls in the first year. And while this project started as an educational initiative and sort of capacity development for medics, it has now broadened to include an entire research and quality improvement arm. So imagine you have a system of over 26,000 calls and patient encounters per day. The opportunity for research and data collection from a system like this is incredible. And this slide just shows a couple examples of what they have looked into. So this is an example of a public-private partnership, which I think is growing increasingly more common in global emergency medicine. So the public side, the Indian government pays for the ambulances, the gas, the medications, and the supplies. And the GVK EMRI, the private partner, is financially responsible for the paramedic and training salaries. And then there's a secondary public-private partnership between GVK EMRI and Stanford Emergency Medicine International, who are the paid contractor to provide the foundational medic education, ambulance protocols, continuing CME, and to assist in the data analysis for research and quality improvement. So this next genre of global health involves health systems development. So similar to what has been done in India, that can also be creating full-fledged clinics and hospitals. So meet Dr. Ed O'Brien. He attended MUSC for both medical school and his residency, actually in internal medicine, but then he went to work clinically at the VA in the emergency department. So Dr. O'Brien and a nonprofit friend, Matt Alexander, started Palmetto Medical Initiative in 2008, which then changed names a few years later to OneWorld Health. And they are our primary partner here for our fellowship at MUSC. And they thought that they could use some of their business sense to come up with a new model and a new way to treat underserved populations. They took their first team to Uganda for a site visit in 2009. And again, I think were impacted and overwhelmed by that disparity and the needs that they saw. And they founded their first clinic there and decided that they were going to use a little bit different model, and that the public hospitals in Uganda, you have a medical exam, which is free, but then if you end up needing services, medications, x-rays, surgery, things like that, those all will cost money. And so they priced their services just a small, what they felt was a reasonable level, just above the public sector. And in doing so, they were able to create a completely self-sustaining clinic and hospital after the first 13 months, meaning that the patient fee covers the operational cost of the facilities. Everything from the water to the cleaning staff is completely covered by the small fee that's charged to the patient. Um, and this model has been so successful that they then expanded that clinic into a hospital, which served 81,000 patients in their first year. They have now opened over 4 to 5 additional satellite clinics in Uganda and have expanded operations into Nicaragua and Honduras. Their NGO that they founded in 2008, by 2019, had an operating budget of 4.1 million. And I'll give you the link on the next slide, but Dr. O'Brien has this great TED talk about I'd rather have HIV than a broken leg. And the sort of whole point of that is that, there's really been this inadequate emphasis on the interventions that help develop a health system. And so there are patients that he was seeing in Uganda that had HIV, which therefore, because of the sort of global attention to HIV, malaria, and TB, gave patients with HIV so much better access to healthcare, even if they had something unrelated to HIV that someone who didn't have HIV, didn't have access to. And so here's that link to that video, which I think is a good short watch. So meet Dr. Lacey Minkin-Smith, who was my co-director of the Global Emergency Fellowship when I started. She came from a family of physicians, but she actually thought she wanted to be an anthropologist. And as an undergraduate, she had an opportunity to do a trip with Project MetaShare, which is a nonprofit funded out of the University of Miami that travels to Haiti, where they focus on child nutrition, education, and maternal fetal health. And it was during this trip, another formative experience for a global health emergency medicine provider, of how medicine could immediately make a significant impact in someone's life, solving an immediate problem in a tangible way. She'd also been previously exposed to subspecialty medicine through her family of physicians, and this immediate gratification also led her to pursue a career in emergency medicine after she attended the University of Miami for medical school. She chose MUSC for her residency, but she knew she wanted to provide medical care in a resource-limited setting and set on a career path to allow her to do this. So she was fluent in French from high school, and in Haiti, she realized the value of being able to use her language skills so directly to help people. She knew she wanted to pursue a global health fellowship, but MUSC didn't have one. So she helped create it with her mentor. Um, Her interest in global health is also paired with a love for infectious diseases. So she earned a diploma in tropical medicine from the University of Minnesota, which was then followed by the more advanced Gorgas course in Peru in tropical medicine. And she just completed her Master's of Science in Global Health and Infectious Disease through the University of Edinburgh, and just went over there this past summer for her graduation. So this positioned her perfectly when a position opened up in St. Croix. And this quote, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." So in October of 2021, she packed up all of her belongings onto a 4x4x4 pallet, shipped her car and her 2 dogs and her husband to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and is now a full-time physician providing emergency care in a critical access hospital. The CT scanner may be out for more than a month, and she may be running an ICU in the ED while awaiting medevacs to an advanced level of care, but she is living her dream, providing invaluable care to a culturally, ethnically diverse population in a resource-limited setting. And her 2 pieces of advice is to always have a mentor in global health, and also to develop a niche or a narrow area of expertise. For her, it's tropical medicine, and then specifically, she is now developed an expertise in marine medicine and marine envenomations, for which she lectures around the world for. And finally, I wanted to talk about our last genre of global health involvement, disaster and humanitarian response. So this particular area of global emergency medicine focuses on natural disasters, on care delivery during armed conflict, after armed conflict, disease epidemics like Ebola and COVID, the health of internationally and internally displaced persons, refugees, especially in the acute phase of a disaster. So Dr. Michael Young is my example of a disaster humanitarian expertise. So he majored in international development in college and had the opportunity to study abroad in the Dominican Republic. And he also had the opportunity to study Spanish. So he started medical school with English and Mandarin, which was his native language, mostly spoken at home, and Spanish. And he already knew coming into medical school that he wanted to do global health. He attended Harvard for medical school and had the opportunity to connect with faculty and mentors in the Harvard affiliate organization, Partners in Health, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. He decided to take a leave of absence between his third and fourth years of medical school under the guise of research that allowed him to work in the sphere of HIV and AIDS in Liberia and helping develop programs to increase adherence to antiretroviral therapy and to build psychosocial support for patients living with HIV and AIDS in a low-income setting. So he thought he wanted to do internal medicine when he started between his third and fourth year as he started this endeavor. And it turned out that while he was working in the public health sphere in Liberia, he was stationed in an area with more than 100,000 refugees who had just fled a civil war in Côte d'Ivoire right next door to Liberia that had ended in 2011. And this is his first exposure to many of the players in the humanitarian sphere, including the International Committee for the Red Cross, ICRC, MSF, or also known as Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, Merlin, which is the Medical Emergency Relief International, which is a humanitarian-based organization out of the UK. And this year really exposed him to the cluster system and an introduction to the humanitarian realm. And as he describes it, in the wake of complete destruction of the infrastructure due to the war and the impact that that had on patients and their livelihoods, was really a formative experience for him. He returned back to medical school at Harvard to complete his sub-Is, and he dug in further with a strong humanitarian presence at Harvard. He saw the overwhelming presence of EM at the disaster and humanitarian table and decided that maybe, as opposed to internal medicine, that EM was a better fit for him. He chose Baylor emergency medicine for his residency. He had family in Houston, and their PD at the time focused in global EM, so it seemed like a perfect fit. During residency, he had the opportunity to pursue a global EM elective, teaching fellow residents in India, and also to pursue a diploma in tropical medicine through Baylor's program. So they do have online programs that you could decide to pursue in residency during a time of your elective. And after his third year of residency, he thought he was maybe going to go locums for a little bit and take a break, but instead he decided to return to academics, and he knew he would need more clinical experience to enter the humanitarian sphere. He stayed at Baylor for a 2-year global EM fellowship with continued opportunities in teaching in India and working clinically in Belize with his mentor, Joy Mackey, who has a lot of projects in Belize. And he also had the opportunity to return to Liberia 5 years later, which happened to be the post-Ebola epidemic. I asked him what prepared him best for his humanitarian work, and he said working clinically in a low resource setting, the time that he had in residency and in fellowship and beyond in Liberia and Belize was really what prepared him the most. So during his fellowship, he also earned a Master of Science from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and completed a thesis in systematic review on the management of hypertension and diabetes in humanitarian settings. So after his fellowship, he decided he wanted to apply to multiple humanitarian organizations. He had a couple interviews and was told, no such luck, try again in a few years. So he decided to apply the following year, the next cycle, and was accepted by MSF, Doctors Without Borders. He completed his onboarding for the volunteer pool, knowing he could then be deployed at any time. And so he accepted a moonlighting position at Baylor, and he had his first assignment, or he took 8 different assignments with MSF from 2019 to 2022. If any of you are familiar with Doctors Without Borders, you have usually a pretty long deployment, at least for that first trip. So usually between 6 to 12 months is required. And so he had a 6-month deployment to a pediatric hospital in Sierra Leone, which staffed 2 adult EM providers with the concern that maybe the community wouldn't know that it was just a pediatric hospital. But as a result, he ended up essentially being a pediatrician for that 6 months. He managed the pediatric ICU, he managed the pediatric wards, he rounded on the weekends, um, in addition to doing sort of the adult EM stuff during the week. He said he couldn't have done this without sort of the experienced, well-seasoned nursing support of previous volunteers who had volunteered many times with MSF, as well as the pediatricians on site. So after that first deployment of 6 months where he was primarily working clinically, his next 7 deployments, he was primarily then working a little bit more and more in administration. He was responsible, he had a lot of deployments during the COVID epidemic, and so was responsible for setting up COVID treatment units, then responsible for accepting admitted patients. He was responsible for supplies, and coming up with a supply chain for medications, as well as PPE and things like that. So over those other deployments, he was deployed to Brazil, Lebanon, Peru, the Palestine occupied territories, and Malawi ×2. And his life during that time would typically, he described it as he would have a deployment for sort of during COVID for 1 to 3 months. He would return to the US for 2 to 4 weeks, kind of take some time off, recover for the sort of extreme environment and conditions that he was working in, and the high number of hours. And then he would start to sort of pick up clinical shifts again for the next maybe 1 to 3 months. And then as he knew he was ready for a new deployment, he would start to pare down his shifts and sort of more become a PRN pickup awaiting another deployment. His salary during these couple years that he worked with MSF was about the salary comparable to a resident. So he got maybe 2/3 of his salary working moonlighting shifts in the US, and then about 1/3 of the stipend and the salary that MSF gives you, though they cover all of your room and board, they cover all of your deployment costs and your health insurance during that time. And so in June of 2022, he accepted a full-time position back at Baylor, and as he described it, he was just getting pretty tired. He now works there full-time clinically and shares his wealth of experience educating residents and medical students. I asked him if he thought that MSF would be possible to do with a family, and Dr. Young says, sort of depending on your partner, it would be, probably unfeasible with a family with young children due to the long length of deployments. But that there are some other organizations who don't require such long extended travel, but it would probably still be challenging and maybe an unattractive option, just depending on the life season that you're in and where your partner is. So currently he has funding for travel and living expenses abroad from his division at Baylor, but he does not have protected time for his continued work in Liberia and Belize, where he has continued to work. So he usually travels 2-week time windows or so between months or between quarters as their clinical schedule it works at Baylor, which is similar to how ours works at MUSC as well, to still allow him to pursue opportunities abroad while working full time. So his advice is that even if you're not particularly interested in disaster EM, those disasters will find you, and you should be as prepared as you possibly can be. Here's a few other examples of groups that if you want to get more involved in disaster humanitarian, Team Rubicon is out of the Carolinas. You can sign up as a layperson. You can sign up as a medical provider. International Medical Corps. Again, MSF requires a lot of clinical experience. It's not a job you take right out of residency. Again, it requires longer deployments. If you'd like some further education, there is some great humanitarian education at Harvard. They have a Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and Institute. And then there's the Health Emergencies and Large Populations course, which is typically a 2-week course that is offered throughout the world. They have it in Geneva, Switzerland. They have it at Hopkins. They offer it in Honolulu. If you Google it, that's a 2-week course. It can be fairly expensive, but it's a great opportunity to give you true hands-on nitty-gritty how to set up a disaster humanitarian camp should a disaster happen wherever you are. And wanted to pass along this link as well. So this is a sort of shorter, smaller course that is completely free in the humanitarian space that's offered by Harvard. And I wanted to give just a quick educational piece on the Sphere project. So I know many of you were probably quite young when the Haiti earthquake happened in 2010, but it was sort of a humanitarian response botch disaster in many ways. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of missing aid money. There were Haitian children that were adopted, aka kidnapped by well-meaning US people who were brought on a plane. An overall uncoordinated response. And so the Sphere project was launched technically before that, but got a lot of attention of how do we do disaster humanitarian response better. We prepare for emergency medicine, we prepare for emergencies, we should be preparing and have sort of a set of guidelines. So that's what the Sphere project is. Just a quick overview, a little bit about what fellowship at MUSC might look like. So many fellowships, you often work a 0.5 FTE, which comes to about half time, or 750 clinical hours as a clinical instructor, about eight-hour shifts per month. You get financial support from an endowment. So you will get a sort of pretty large stipend actually to help support either educational initiatives or travel across the world. And some excellent mentorship. You can choose a 1 or 2 year fellowship based on what you would like to pursue. As I mentioned, OneWorld Health is our primary NGO partner, that we have had fellows who have traveled and worked in Peru, in Honduras, in Haiti, Guyana, in partnership with Vanderbilt. Sort of the world is your oyster. If you want to come up with it and plan it, you can do that as part of your fellowship. We require that you complete some sort of advanced degree, whether you decide to go big and do a master's of some sort, or whether you choose just a smaller course like the health course, the 2-week initiative for disasters and humanitarian response. So that's a little bit of what our fellowship looks like at MUSC. So to close, the 5 realms of emergency medicine that we talked about are global emergency medicine research, education, health systems development, disaster and humanitarian response, and direct clinical care on the ground. Some parting advice from me personally is that language proficiency is a huge asset. I have English and Spanish, but sure wish I had more, and I'm jealous of the people who have an innate language ability. Additional expertise is always helpful. So a degree in tropical medicine, disaster response, a master's degree, or even a certificate. The more education you can get to help you develop expertise in this realm, the better. And the more time that you can spend abroad, the better. I've learned stuff even from short experiences in a low income setting. I always learn a ton, and the time there always seems like there is a lot of living that happens when you're abroad. All of the realms that we talked about are sort of overlap. None of them are truly independent, but being a strong clinician, if you're not sure which area you want to go into, being a strong clinician first will always serve you well. The value of finding a mentor in global health cannot be understated. I think back so many times of how someone influenced my career and mentors in the past. And time now is your most valuable asset. So narrowing your focus as much as you can and being very intentional with how you spend your time is critical to help you be successful. And I just want to leave you with, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I look at global EM now as burnout prevention. It has helped me still feel like I'm making a difference sometimes in the difficult clinical environment that we experience here, sometimes in the US. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you. Please reach out for questions about fellowship, about what our track looks like, about wanting to get involved at a residency that might not have a program or don't have a mentor. Please reach out to me for further questions. Thank you so much.